All right, we'll go ahead and start in prayer and then we can kick it off so we can get moving. So, thank you all for joining us again. We're on week 7 of 8, so we're almost to the end of our time. And I think we have an exciting agenda ahead of us, and I'm sure a lot of interesting conversations ahead of us today. So, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Spirit of God, deep within us resides a spark, a strength, an unquenchable hope that will not die. No matter how we try to walk away and say that our work has no meaning, that nothing ever changes, that the powerful always win, that the world is irreparably corrupt, inside of us still is a still small voice whispers, that is not true. And once again, a fire ignites within us, that dream of the day you promised. We want that day with all our hearts, and we recommit to working with you to bring it about. May our ministries of administration be animated by the strength called hope. May they be fierce and persistent in the face of challenge, steady and tenacious in the face of change. And may they nourish, energize, and sustain us so that we might more fully serve your plan. Amen.
Thank you, Bailey. I was thinking we have the gift of the day. Isn't that great? And what do we make of it? And what a great opportunity to learn, to stretch, to be able to carry out our responsibilities, HR responsibilities in your different positions. And I was thinking, what a great opportunity to take a class during or at a time that you're working with HR. So it gives you an opportunity to say, I learned this today, but I could implement it tomorrow or right that same day. So learning and working goes to me together so well. So here we are. So last week, what was your takeaway from our module on employee relations? If you could text in the chat. Where's my chat? So what's your takeaway from employee relations? Yes, take employee concerns seriously, listen to their story, get their feelings. Okay, investigations and documentation, so important. Control points. Oh, yes, I remember that. Develop ways and time to check in with employees, those control points. Communicate and document. Yep. Communication, so important, so important that it's clear and concise and frequent, I would say. As others have said, document, document, document. Okay, I think that's it, Richard. They tuckered out on me.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Before we get started, I had sent a bunch of exhibits, 1 through 7. I hope everybody received them. But I just want to briefly mention Exhibit 1, which is the independent contractor agreement. If you recall, when I did the Fair Labor Standards module, I talked about independent contractors and the agreement. This is a sample of an agreement that is very useful when putting together requirements for an independent contractor. First of all, is the first part is the agreement. Then the second part, which is very important, is the scope of work, which is very brief, very limited, but at least it gives you something to go by and a way of managing an independent contractor. So anybody have any questions on that? I know you haven't had a chance to study it, but just look at it, keep it in mind. If you have any questions, we can come back to it next week. So. Okay, with that, the exhibit 2 just is a synopsis of what we're going through today. If you have had a chance to read it, that's the reason I put that together. It just gives you an idea. So with that in mind, I'm going to bring our presentation forth. Can everybody see that?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, Jessica, what did I do wrong?
Oh, go back down to the share button on the bottom because we stopped the share before. So
Right,
just do the same thing you did before
I did that
with the
already.
green share button and just
Yes.
share screen.
Hold on.
There we
There-
go. Yeah, now bring up the presentation.
Now you
Yeah.
got it?
Yeah, now just
Oh,
push play.
Okay. Okay,
Oh,
great.
yeah, push
Excellent.
play, Richard. Yeah, there we go.
There we go. Okay, now, again, this is, again, the second to the last session we'll be holding, so hopefully we can get a lot of information in the next 2 sessions, but the last session, employee relations, kind of a prelude to what I'm going to be covering today, which the module on performance management. So with that in mind, let us move on with the program. So performance management, just by way of introduction, first of all, the objective is to help you understand what performance management is, its different aspects and its impact. We want to understand your role in your parish or school organization as related to performance management, which is to assist the pastor, the principal, or other managers, provide information and assistance, and act as a liaison between the parish and the organization and St. Cloud Human Resources. Those are basically some very simple responsibilities that you might have. You want to ensure that processes followed to avoid potential complaints and litigation. So that's the one thing about performance management. Personally, I have used it faithfully in my career. And I have to tell you, it's something to be proud of. I've never had an evaluation turned back. I never heard a dismissal turned back, and only because I've applied the principles that I'm going to share with you today. Now, in all fairness, what I'm going to share with you in the next hour and a half to 2 hours is something that a corporation would normally spend a week on. So there's a lot of information here, and by all means, feel free to ask questions as we move along. I want to make sure you understand as much about this as possible. So moving on, the topics we'll be talking about is, first of all, a definition, description of performance management, the overall objectives, management's responsibilities, and we're going to talk about the performance management cycle, which is the elements of evaluation process, the steps in the evaluation process, and the applicable documents, some of which I've shared with you today that I've already sent you. First of all, the description. Performance management is ongoing communication regarding job responsibilities and performance expectations. Nothing more. That's a very simple definition. However, the emphasis is on communication, as I mentioned right from the very beginning. In any human resources environment, communication is the big hitter. It's a big subject that really needs to be emphasized. Performance management is a process which encourages employee development by providing frequent feedback, letting the employee know what's going on, in other words. It promotes improved job performance and skills development, and it involves defining performance standards, documenting, evaluating, and discussing individual performance. Just by way of information, this morning I had a session with a priest who is in trouble. He has been, a complaint was lodged against him by one of his employees that says that He was very overbearing, makes side comments, criticizes the employee. And in meeting with the pastor, we find out that one of the things that he has not done is document anything regarding performance management or any of the problems that he's experienced with employees. So again, the communication cycle breaks down, especially the documentation part. Definition, moving on, it's a focus on behavior, and this is employee conduct, for example. And the examples of this are behavior harmful to others, personal appearance, confidentiality breaches, conflict of interest, illegal and unethical issues, and excessive absenteeism, tardiness, misuse of sick leave. So this is all covered in what you call performance management, and it's all tied together. The results obviously are possible disciplinary action up to and including termination if you have violations of these principles. The objectives, first of all, is professionalize the management of employees in the Diocese of St. Cloud. That's what Bailey's trying to do to hopefully professionalize your performance in your different locations. Want to implement justice in the workplace by enhancing effective communication, supervisors, and employees, providing for better relationship between the manager and employee, and improvement in the work environment. We discussed this last week under employee relations. I thought that was a prelude. Elimination of terminations without cause. This is a big one. This is a very important one because traditionally in some dioceses, a new pastor comes in, the first thing he does is he wants to terminate everybody and bring people that he knows that he feels comfortable with. You've had a good performance management program, that does not happen. So that's a very important part for continuation rather of the progress in any particular parish or location. It's a curbing of unfair, arbitrary, or biased treatment and discrimination. It ensures employees understand that performance requirements in the church are much the same as in the private sector. Sometimes we get arguments by employees says, well, I know where we're going with this. I didn't have to do this in my last workplace. Well, I beg to differ because yeah, a lot of the requirements are much the same in any organization, whether it's nonprofit or profit. Any questions so far? Okay, objectives going on. We want to eliminate the perception that working for the church is the same as retirement. Unfortunately, we have this happening in a lot of situations or a lot of locations in the different dioceses. Sometimes people have the impression that they're hired with a church, they're hired for life, they don't have to worry about working that hard. And in effect, they've retired, just nobody's told them. Well, that's not the case. We have the same as any organization, the church has to continue, it has to do the job that it's entrusted to do, which is obviously protect the faithful and also protect the parish and the assets of the parish. Improve employee productivity by defining goals and objectives, praising where praise is merited, and by addressing deficiencies in a timely manner. Implement element of business into church management, which is a church model, which is accountability based on gospel values versus corporate America business model profitability. This part is interesting because when I first came, and some of you may have experienced the same thing coming from the secular world, when I came into the church from the world of business, very often, probably the first 9 months, I heard, well, you know, you're bringing in aspects of the business into the church, and this is a church. We're not a business. So I kept hearing that for approximately 6 months, 9 months. Finally, I said, wait a minute, time out. I've heard enough. The church is a business. I'm sorry, it may be not in the concept of a profit sharing or profit making business, but there's elements of the church that have to be treated the same as any other business. So from that point on, I drove a stake in the ground, says, I don't want to hear that anymore. But some of you have probably already heard this in your careers. Again, minimize the problems and potential for adversity. Morale problems, employee dissatisfaction, prevent lawsuits for wrongful termination or constructive discharge, and prevent complaints to the Department of Labor, IRS audits, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and so forth. So these are some of the things we want to reach as objectives in the performance management cycle. Any questions so far? Anybody have any questions regarding wrongful termination or constructive discharge?
Yeah, Richard, I just have a clarifying. So when we're going through this management, so I'm envisioning the employer kind of has a form to follow so that, you know, the goals and objectives, what is this person working on, and, you know, different comments that that employer want to make, and give the employee an opportunity maybe to add to that paper. I'm seeing a form here. Is that?
Yeah, we'll get to that, Regina.
Okay.
Give me a few minutes and we'll get to that part. That's a very important aspect, by the way. Okay, moving on. What are management responsibility? First of all, as a manager, you need to understand the value of performance management. This is something that's very, very important. It's a formal, systematic method of monitoring work, behavior, achievement of goals, and the evaluation of results. It's a utilization of performers' results to make decisions, and decisions such as budget, allocation of resources, promotions, merit increases. Too often, we take those actions without understanding the value of our employees or what the employees contribute or what their situation is. So that's a very valuable aspect of utilization of performance results. The application of participative management model. This means to involve employees in decision-making whenever possible. That's the concept of participative management. It doesn't mean that you're ceding to employees what their responsibilities, but it's including them in decision-making decisions whenever possible. You want to give the employees a feeling that their work is important, and you do this by applying, the performance management cycle. You want to promote efficiency through employee understanding, involvement, and buy-in. You want to create a spirit of teamwork and cooperation. In other words, employees need to understand, the same as managers, what performance management is and what's involved. So that's a way of promoting efficiency through employee buy-in and getting their cooperation in the whole cycle. Any questions so far? Okay. Integrate the process into the normal management activity of the parachute organization. Performance management is not a one-time effort. It must be ongoing to be effective, particularly the evaluation part. It must be part of the culture of the organization. In other words, in order to be effective, you cannot do it just one time and forget about it. Unfortunately, in some organizations, it does happen and it's effective, it's counterproductive. It's intended to be able to evaluate staff members. This is exempt, non-exempt employees, clergy, religious, or volunteers where practical. Now, just the fact that you have a priest working for you does not mean that priest is not subject to an evaluation, the same as religious. Their employees are working for you, then they're fair game. Most people don't believe this, but that's, the reality of life. Volunteers, I mentioned before that we rely in many parishes for volunteers almost exclusively for one of the major aspects of running a parish. Well, there can be subject to performance management as well in a limited way, but it can apply just as well. Understand how to address performance and non-performance related behavior, attitude problems, for example. This means harassment, rudeness, demeaning behavior, non-cooperation, and failure to respect fellow employees. So these are all things that can be applied and can be part of the performance management cycle. Now, talking about harassment, rudeness, demeaning behavior, so forth, if you look at exhibit number 3, there's a correction action form. This was into the forms that may be necessary to use it. If you have an employee, for example, that you want to call their attention to, harassment, rudeness, demeaning behavior is something that is not always in a performance plan, Nevertheless, it's in your employee guidelines and your employee handbook. Something is to be addressed without a doubt. So what you do it is you apply it through a correction action form. Now, this is obviously prior to applying the principle of progressive discipline. Now, any comments on progressive discipline? Does everybody understand what that means? Anybody?
Richard, I was going to ask how many have been in that situation where they had to provide a correction for an employee and apply that or put that in writing.
Anybody answer then?
Yeah, I've had to do that, not at the church, but at a previous life. I had an employee that had trouble coming back from their breaks on time and just never could get it corrected. We eventually had to let the person go. But progressive discipline would be, the consequences start to escalate the more, if they're not able to fix or resolve the issue, your consequences start to escalate as a result of that.
Yeah, very good. That's basically what it amounts to. One of the things about progressive discipline that sometimes managers miss it is if you've got a culture, for example, that you run into that says that employees come in habitually late or they leave early, then the subject of progressive discipline comes in, where you meet with the employees and the staff and advise them that, look, this is the requirement in this parish. Everybody's supposed to be on time. They're supposed to leave on time versus coming in late or leaving early. And that is the start of progressive discipline. Then from there on, if somebody violates that, then the concept normally calls for, if it's the first time violation, then it's a simple word of mouth counseling session that says, look, you've been tardy the last few days. I have to call it to your attention because you're supposed to be here on time. If it continues, then you get into another situation that says, look, I've talked to you about this before. If you have to continue this, then I will have no choice but to put a corrective action form in place, which is a formal reprimand. So that's basically the progressive discipline cycle, which kind of ends with the corrective action form or the plan. Any
Yes.
questions on it? Any confusion on that, please?
And Richard, Amanda was saying that's using that same example about someone being late and she had to take correction action.
Yes, that's basically the way to do it. Again, that's the application of the progressive discipline cycle. Okay. Any questions? Okay, moving on. Understand the mechanics again of progressive discipline, and I've just mentioned that, and the corrective action plans. This is what it's all about. Understand the mechanics of how to perform evaluations as the next step. And that calls for the development of performance objectives, inspection of employee performance against objectives, which is interim reviews. Then you also have the subject of 360-degree input, which is optional in most cases, but is a valuable tool, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And then the final evaluation addressing strengths and weaknesses. It does provide for personal development, growth of the individual, hopefully, and also it allows preparation for work within or outside the church. Now, one point that a lot of times we miss as managers is that working for the church is not for everyone. We have many employees that come thinking that working for the church is their desire because God leads them there. They feel that they contribute to the church. However, it's not always a work for everybody. It really takes somebody that understands the church and is willing to provide the services that we require as a church. Any comments on that? Any philosophical views on that from anybody? Okay. Performance management cycle. Evaluation of the employees is a key aspect, which starts with a well-defined hiring process. We talked about the hiring process in the second or third session. And this is the key aspect, which starts with that process. It's a selection followed by well-executed performance reviews and evaluation. It applies to all employees, current employees, new hires, rehires, or transfers. It's a key process during the introductory period, or if you call it a probationary period, and actually throughout the employee's career. So it's not isolated to a one-time happening. So the performance management cycle basically is, first of all, set the expectations, progress reviews, and the final evaluation of performance. And we're talking about effective feedback throughout all phases of the cycle. So this is, again, the communication cycle that goes through as part of the performance management aspect. Any questions? Okay, performance management cycle, moving on. It includes several steps. First of all is a communications meeting with the employee. Then the performance plan preparation, development performance objectives, implementation of the plan, ongoing inspection of work. And this is what I call the touch and feel aspect of it. And I mentioned control points at the last session. This is where your ongoing inspection of work comes in, the touch and feel part of it. Interim reviews, these are extremely important, and normally they're midway through the appraisal period at a minimum. You ask the question, well, what's an appraisal period? Well, normally it's a period of a year. And you want to cycle the interim reviews somewhere in between, halfway through that, or maybe split it up into quarters. It kind of depends on your personnel and what you as a manager want to do. Then step number 6 is a final evaluation, and step number 7 is pastors or St. Cloud HR review. Now, going up to number 2, please look at Exhibit 4, if you would. That's a sample plan, performance plan. If you go to look at that Exhibit 4, you have at the top the employee name. Then you have the performance plan that's divided into different aspects. First one is the transaction analysis and processing. This is basically the guts of what the employee is supposed to be doing. Then you have quality of work, quantity of work. And then you have initiative, dependability, teamwork, human relations, and if you're a manager, people management responsibilities. So these are basically the major areas of an evaluation under this process that I'm presenting now. You may have different aspects in your particular organization you want to hit there on, but this pretty well covers the gamut of what a person normally is expected in a performance management cycle. Any questions on the performance plan?
Yeah, I have a,
No,
do you suggest we do this on a regular, this isn't just like, I guess what I've done in previous lives is when someone's struggling, you put them on a performance improvement plan. This isn't that, right? This is just,
no, we'll
setting-
get into the performance improvement plan in the next session. What this is a starting point for your performance management or your evaluation process. And what you do normally, the preparation part on your part as the manager is to decide what employees you're going to evaluate and how you're going to do their performance plan. So let's take for example, an administrative assistant. What you want to do is you want to look at the job description. You're going to also look at what parts of the job description are going to apply, and you're going to put in the sample this performance plan. And that performance plan in part is part of what's in the job description, but also includes things that you as the manager feels needs to be in that plan. For example, communications, punctuality, those things that cordiality to the public and so forth. So there's various other situations that you want to include in that plan based on you as the manager's requirements, not necessarily just the job description. So what you do is you put that together, and then at some point in time, you're going to present that to the employee. Now, If you would look at Exhibit 5, that's a personnel performance appraisal form. That appraisal form matches to the items that are in the sample performance plan. If you look at the form itself, it starts up at the top, very simple. It says performance appraisal form. The top part is pretty well self-explanatory, but then you have the ratings underneath it. For example, outstanding, very good, good, improvement needed, and unsatisfactory. Moving on down, you have the transaction analysis and processing. If you look at the sample performance plan, it matches. Then you have quality, quantity, initiative, dependability, teamwork, human relations, and communication, and so forth. So when you do the evaluation, this is what you're going to do is to evaluate the employee against the performance plan that you put together. So suffice it at this point to talk about that. So let's move on a little bit more. So,
Richard, I'm
yes,
thinking I might be on the same page as Kent with this. So it's sort of this is like part of the onboarding, right? So you might, after 60 days, 30 days, decide to do this with the new employee. Is that the
nor-
plan?
normally what I would recommend is after the onboarding, within say 30 days or so, you put a performance plan in place that outlines the expectations of that employee during the introductory period. And a lot of this is learning. A lot of it is learn the process, learn the local culture, and so forth. So it's a relatively simple performance plan to begin with. Then after that introductory period, the evaluation takes place, say, in a period of 90 days. Then you move into the follow-on performance management cycle, as I've described here. So basically, your starting point is after the introductory period. But at that point in time, you will already have started the evaluation process as well. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, yes, thank you.
Okay. No, so let's get on to the cycles, okay, the steps. So assuming that you're going to put a performance plan in place, what you've already done is you put together your performance plan based on what you want in that performance uh, plan. You put the parts of the job description, you put parts of the what you want done, you put it in the performance plan. Now you're getting ready to meet with the employee. Now, very, very important steps. First of all, the manager should meet with the employee exclusively to do this. The first meeting is you want to establish rapport and open communications. You want to ensure that the employee understands there's mutual understanding of the parish or organization and the church objectives. You know, as the manager, what the parish or organization and church objective does. You want to make sure that the employee does as well. So you want to take a little bit of time to explain that. You want to ensure the employee understands the evaluation process. You're going to tell the employee, we're going to put a performance plan together. This is how it works. And at some point in time, I'm going to evaluate your process or your progress against that performance plan. You want to make sure the employee understands that. You want to initiate a development of the individual performance objectives, which is a performance plan. This is the second part of that cycle, step one. You want to put the outline of the objectives and expectations of the employee, and that should be tailored to the employee. One size does not always fit all. And again, the starting point is the job description. So the first thing is you want to meet with the employee, let them know what's going to happen. The second part is you're going to start the development of that performance plan. So then your starting point is the job description. So going into the job description, essential duties and responsibilities, what I've highlighted here, for example, are some of the things that I would include in this performance plan for say, an administrative assistant. Fosters communication, works collaboratively with the pastor and parish and diocesan employees, coordinates the communication and record keeping of funerals, baptism, and weddings, work collaboratively with the diocese and accountant to ensure all finances are handled as required, and then perform, maintain the parish registry and other records, assist with ministry record keeping and communication to parish and families, help maintain schedules and notifications for liturgical events, provide administrative support to the pastor and other parish personnel as necessary. These are just some of the requirements that normally you will find in most administrative assistant job descriptions. So you want to include those in that performance plan. In addition to that, you may want to include things that you personally want that administrative assistant to do, which is periodically meet with parishioners for whatever reason, attend meetings, perhaps some of the ministries. It depends on what your requirements are in your particular parish, but these are the beginnings of the performance plan. Any questions so far? I'm throwing a lot of information at you that may seem a little bit vague, so please stop me and ask questions because I don't want to mislead you here and miss some steps. But again, the important part is the start of the performance planning cycle.
And Richard, I'm thinking how important the job description is. That it's
Very
clear
important.
and so much a part of this.
Yeah, without the job description, you cannot really put a performance plan in place. Let's put it that way. Because that job description describes the major requirements of any job. So you want to make sure that you cover that and include it. Now, in the performance plan, you don't include everything in the job description because aside from the performance plan, you may apply other aspects of the job description, the evaluation of that employee, which may not necessarily be included in the performance plan, but they're still applicable. So the job description, yes, is extremely important. I wouldn't even begin an evaluation if I didn't have a job description in place. Let's put it that way.
I've got a question regarding that for like parishes where some of the employees don't have job descriptions, long-term and long-time employees. Do you have recommendations for how to go about putting together a job description, especially if the employees might not really want to have one written down?
Well, that's not their call. You're the manager. You're in the driver's seat. So you have the right to say, listen, I know you've done without a job description for X many years. However, now we're getting in a new era. And my requirement is that everybody's going to have a performance plan. I know that's something you're not used to, but I want to be fair across the board with everybody. So you, including everybody else, will have one. Yes, it's something new, and yes, you will run into those situations, but this is where you have to make the decision because you have to be fair to all if you're going to implement this process. If not, then you may as well not do it at all. So does that answer your question?
Yep, that's helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
Keller, also, you could share job descriptions. So you mentioned that maybe you don't have one for them, but maybe another parish has one that you could share, or Bailey has. At NACPA, we have a job description library that I'll be glad to give Bailey access to, so you could have access to.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, job descriptions again. There's umpteen job descriptions. One thing to remember: job descriptions, they're not embedded in concrete. So you can take a job description that another parish uses and maybe manipulate a little bit to include things that you personally want. For example, if you're talking about the basic requirements, one parish may want the individual to be fluent in the language, another one may not. So those are some variations on a job description, but for the most part, job descriptions can be pretty well standard depending on the position. But the variation comes primarily in the performance plan. That's where you really include differentiations between or the different aspects of what you want in the performance plan. Questions? Okay. Step 2, performance plan preparation. It includes essential functions in the job description. Again, not all of them. You want to put the ones that you feel are important in the job description, in the performance plan. includes management and St. Cloud requirements. Now, those requirements may be a little different. St. Cloud may have a different requirement than another diocese, for example. But some of the common ones are punctuality. I always include narrate. If I have a processor that's processing either payroll or accounts payable, or I normally strive for a narrate of 95%. I give the 5% leeway. Somebody else may go a little bit higher, but typically a 95.5 error rate is acceptable. Timeliness. Okay, timeliness means if I have a secretary or an administrative assistant, there's work to be turned around to in time to be 24 hours. It could be 48 hours. It depends on the complexity of that operation. So something to consider. Excellent customer service. One of the things that I personally am always been very high on is customer service. Rudeness does not go in my portfolio. That's unacceptable. You have to provide that excellent customer service. It's hard enough to deal with customers because you can run into them in a rude situation, but you have to maintain that excellence yourself as the service provider. Normal expectations in any organization, whether they're profit or not profit. These are normally situations that you'll find in the IBM Corporation, you'll find in our dioceses and our parishes as well. These are all requirements. Expectations should be reasonably attainable. One of the things you need to be conscious of when you put a performance plan together is that the employee should be able to do everything that's in there without having to go through hoops and bounds. Sometimes managers go overboard in putting a performance plan in place that makes it almost impossible for that employee to achieve a superior rating. That should be reasonably attainable. Managers should review the initial draft of the performance objectives of the employee. Now we get into a different cycle here. Once you put together the performance plan, you want to review that initial draft of the performance objectives with the employee. You provide an opportunity for input and questions. And Regina, this has answers your earlier questions. When you put a performance plan, you should give the employee an opportunity to provide input, because you may put in something in there is not realistic for what that employee does. I've seen that happen many times when a manager will put a performance plan in place, but it nowhere relates to what that employee is doing. So you need to be careful with that. And in presenting this to the employee, what you want to do is give the employee an opportunity to review what you put together, ask him to provide input and let you know if there's anything in there that is inappropriate or something that the individual is not responsible for. And you give the employee an opportunity to provide input. Bottom line, both should agree on the objectives and the contents of the plan. This is a little give and take session that you have with the employee. You present the plan, you give the employee an opportunity to provide input. Hopefully in the end, both of you agree that yes, this is something that's valuable and something that we can work with. Now, once you do that first session, and then normally I recommend a second session. You give the employee the performance plan you put together. You tell the employee, look, take this with you, look at it. We'll get back tomorrow or the day after, and we can talk about it some more and make sure that we're both in agreement as we talked about today. This is the reason for the second session. Now, there's a reason and a method to that madness. Okay. And I'll talk to you in a little bit about that. Now, the plan implementation part is step 3. It's complete when the manager and the employee agree. And the expectation is that both agree. However, keep in mind that you're the manager, you have the final say. There are some employees that make it a little bit difficult, say, well, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to do that. Time out. I'm your manager. This is reasonably attainable. There's no reason why you can't manage that. That's going to stay in the performance plan. Okay. The manager should remind the employee that the plan is what the employee would be evaluated on. This is the value of this. This is why you want to get hopefully agreement, because That's what you will evaluate that employee on at the end of the year or during the interim reviews. The ban should be reviewed and revised as necessary during the appraisal period. In other words, once you implement the plan, it's not embedded in concrete. Things change during the course of a year, requirements of the employee or management requirements, and it should be revised as necessary. Again, it's not embedded in concrete. Changes do come about, and changes in requirement do happen. Now, when that happens, you want to make sure the employee is aware that you're changing the performance plan and that the employee agrees. Any questions on that part? Okay, going on to step 4. This is the ongoing inspection of work. Remember the control points, and I'm glad that was picked up. Management awareness is vital. You need to inspect work on an ongoing basis. This is what I call the touch and feel aspect. Ongoing observations versus micromanagement. One of the things you do not want to do is to look over the employee's shoulder. Again, you need to understand the process of control points. If you understand those control points, then it's relatively simple to observe what the employee is doing. Sometimes you can set those points and you can do that evaluation in your computer if you have a processing, for example, timeliness and so forth. When an employee is not meeting expectations, deficiencies need to be addressed immediately and formally. An example, if you run into a situation, once you put the performance plan in place and your performance cycle is in place, if the employee is not meeting expectations, those deficiencies need to be addressed immediately and formally. This is one of the things where we as managers sometimes fall down on is we see something that's not being done right, but we procrastinate. We're afraid to confront the employee. Shouldn't be that way. Again, going back to the employee relations presentation, there needs to be an environment where managers and the employees are not afraid to talk to each other. So those need to be addressed immediately and formally. If you've got a good employee relations environment, that should be relatively simple. Now, one very important aspect, there should be no what you call hallway appraisals or self-reprimands. A hallway appraisal example is where you're out in the middle of the floor and you bring a subject up to the employee and reprimand him for something that he or she did wrong. That's a hallway appraisal. Never do that. That's the worst thing you can do. Always bring the employee into your office, sit down and do it formally. Now, soft reprimands, on the other hand, are where you want to be flowery and don't really broach the subject of what the employee is not doing right. Too often managers are afraid to tell the employee, look, I'm not happy with what you're doing. You need to change your way of operation. What the manager sometimes does, look, it's brought to my attention you're doing what you're doing. Please try a little harder. Well, that's a soft reprimand. You want to be upfront with the employee. You don't want to doctor it. You don't want to be really too soft on that. And again, this is not to say you want to be the mean manager, but again, it's part of the communication cycle that's most important. Excuse me. Deficiencies need to be addressed in the final evaluation. Again, as you're moving on, you're addressing deficiencies. As you move on, you should be documenting those counseling sessions that you had, if they're not formal, but you should write down. And again, this goes back to the progressive discipline cycle. If you do a verbal reprimand, you write it down. You don't necessarily make a big issue of it, but you want to document the fact that you brought that deficiency to the employee's attention. The manager needs to be conscious of possible external influence or situations beyond the employee's control. When you do an appraisal, there are many instances where you may have an employee that's not doing the job. You really need to be conscious and be aware of possible external influence or situations that the employee cannot control. Sometimes there's family problems, sometimes there are health problems, sometimes there are more serious problems, alcohol, drugs, and so forth. So you need to be on the lookout for those. Any questions so far on what I've presented?
Richard, could you talk a little bit about ongoing observation versus micromanagement? Because I hear
Yes,
in
sure.
one of my situations, they complain about micromanagement.
Yes. Mike, let's talk about micromanagement first of all. Micromanagement is probably one of the worst things a manager can do. That means you're constantly looking at what the employee is doing. And I've seen managers do their every 2 or 3 times a day going to the employee's desk and asking how that's going, wanting to see what the employee is doing, and not giving the employee enough opportunity to get their job done. That's micromanagement. That's getting a little bit too far with the employee. On the other hand, there is a need for the management to understand what the employee is doing. So that can be done again by understanding what are the control points? What do I need to look for in this situation? For example, if it's a person that's doing accounts payable, there's a requirement normally, depending on the organization or what the CFO wants, is each invoice needs to be paid within 10 days, no later than 30 days. Sometimes vendors will give you a percentage discount, depending on how soon you pay that, if you pay within 10 days or 15 days. Those are samples of control points. So if you have an employee that constantly pays at the end of the month and has missed those discounts, that's a control point. That's a negative. Also, if the employee doesn't pay on time, let's say that employee does not process a payment at the end of 30 days, goes into the 45-day cycle. Now you've got another problem. Now you've got a credibility problem for the organization. That's another control point. So those are things that you might want to keep in mind. Also, on the other hand, you have the people that control the incoming invoices, for example. How soon do they get to get that invoice to the person who's actually doing the dispensing of the funds? So there's different ways. So those are the touch and feel aspects versus micromanagement. Does that make it a little bit clearer?
Yes.
Any
Thank you.
any questions from anybody?
I'm just kind of curious on the hallway appraisal and the soft reprimands part there. I understand what you're saying about not doing our appraisal in the hallway, call them in and do it formally and all that. But if you're looking at if something's been brought to your attention that needs just a slight adjustment or to be addressed or just brought to the employee's attention before it becomes an issue, are you saying that that still should be formal and documented and everything else?
Well, it doesn't. Let me go back to progressive discipline. Let's say that you found all of a sudden that an employee, you happen to be in the employee station, you notice that the employee is doing something that's contrary to what the parish expects. Very simply is calling the employee later on or in a few minutes, say, look, bring him into the office. Look, I saw you doing this. It's really unacceptable. It's not going to go any further than this, but I just need to bring it to your attention. That's what you call not a soft reprimand, but the start of progressive discipline. Should you document? Yeah, you document your own personal file. Now, you're not going to do a formal corrective action plan, but you're also not doing a hallway appraisal. Hallway appraisal means do it out in the middle of the floor in front of everybody. That's the last thing you want to do. So now let's talk about documentation here because I want to make sure you understand. Documentation comes in different forms. For example, if you're going to do a corrective action plan or a letter of reprimand to an employee, that normally goes into the personnel file. Okay, that remains there as long as the employee is or goes into the next performance cycle. However, there's a lot of little situations where you might want to bring employees' attention to something. Those are things that you document very briefly. And I always let me regress a little bit. I've always been the type of person that carries with me a 3-ring binder. You know, you can carry a chief, whatever, um, uh, big chief with you if you want, but I've always used a 3-ring binder when I have something that's important to me, that I've talked to somebody about something, an employee, for example. I always jot down the date, what I said. Okay. The reason you want to do that is at some point in time, if you get into an adverse situation or litigation with the employee, that documentation is valid in the court of law. For example, if you told the employee very, very clearly that you did not want him or her to do a certain aspect of the job that they're doing wrong, the employee then would come back and says, well, he never told me. Well, wait a minute, I documented this on such and such a date, and this is the time, and this is what I told you. That's a valid document. And this is why it's always good to keep those documents available for your own use if necessary. Again, not everybody, not everything you document goes into the employee file, but you have it available should you need it at a different point. This is especially true when you do an investigation, for example. Things come up that you need to document. I can't tell you how often that has been handy for me when I've had to do an investigation or somebody has made an accusation of some sort against me or one of the employees. Questions on that documentation part? And did I answer the hallway appraisal situation okay?
Yep, that answered that. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Any other questions? Okay, let's go into step 5. Now you've got the performance plan in place. You reviewed with the employee. Both of you agree that that's what the employee is going to be evaluated on. Now, the next question is, you want to make sure that periodically you review that performance plan with the employee and let them know how they're doing. So the first one would be at the end of the introductory or probationary period. You remember I said between 30 and about 30 days or so, you put an initial performance plan in place. Normally there will be a trainee performance plan along with some processing requirements. At the end of the 90 days, you do an evaluation. No, there may be situations where at the end of 90 days, you still don't have a clear picture of what that employee is doing. There's nothing wrong with extending that, but at some point in time, you're going to have to do that first evaluation. And again, when you do that, you review the overall performance of that individual against the detail as needed. For example, you go through the performance plan line items and part of whatever's in the performance plan, you review with them and says, well, okay, item 1 here, you did fine. It's superior or it's unsatisfactory, whatever it might be. But you give them a rating for that particular period. You review the entire plan by key area of responsibility. You want to compliment the employee on areas of good performance, and you also address areas needing improvement. So you want to do a couple of things. You want to make sure that on the one hand, you balance the evaluation or the review by telling the employee that what they're doing well. On the other hand, you also want them to know where they need to improve. You want to do the reviews after the introductory period. Once that evaluation is done, then you get into the full performance management cycle. And that starts for normally a period of a year or shorter, depending on what you decide. So what you want to do is you want to do an interim review halfway during the appraisal period. So if your appraisal period is going to be a period of a year, at the minimum, you should have halfway through that appraisal period. Normally, in my experience, I always start my appraisal period starting July 1 to June 30th. So somewhere in the December timeframe, I want to do an interim review. Sometimes, depending on the employee, depends on the complexity of the job. I may do it more frequently. I may do it every quarter. It kind of depends on you as a manager to depend it. But at the very minimum, I do it halfway through the performance cycle. Reviews should be documented. Not necessarily documented as an evaluation itself, except when you do the final evaluation after the introductory period. But if you do an interim review, all you need to do is in your notebook again, you document the areas that you covered, what your discussion was, where you praise the employee and what areas need to be improved. That's all you need to do. You don't have to go into any great detail, such as filling out the appraisal form itself, okay? You want to do other reviews as circumstances dictate. For example, if you've not everything in place, you've got employment plans, all of a sudden the employee's performance is declining seriously. Well, there's an opportunity to do again another review. And this is where you talk to the employee and says, look, your uh, performance is declining rapidly. I need to know why, what's happening. So that's another review that you do. Any questions on this, on the cyclone as we moved on here? Have I confused anybody? Questions? Okay, moving on. Again, performance cycle, set expectations, review the progress, and evaluate the performance. Again, the effective feedback is midway of the appraisal period and all phases of the cycle. So you want to keep that in mind as you move on and determine how often you're going to do those interim reviews. Continuing on with step 5, the reviewing manager needs to be concise as to the level of performance. When you do a review, it's extremely important that you be candid. You want to make sure that the employee understands what the deficiencies are. They should not be downplayed. You want to limit any flowery comments. One of the things that we're as managers, and it's human nature, we like to be nice. We like to be nice to the employees and like to feel that they'll be feel good if we give them some flowery comments. Well, that's not always necessarily productive. You want to limit those flowery comments. And when I'm talking about flowery comments, for example, you've got an employee that's clearly needs improvement. You do not want to say, well, John is doing a very good job. However, there's some things he needs to improve on. You want to say John's deficiency needs improved for these reasons, and these are the areas that need to be improved. You don't want to downplay them. You want to limit those flowery comments. The manager should leave little doubt as to the employee's level of performance. If I do an interim review, I want to let the employee know where they stand. So you would say, if I were to appraise you now, I would rate you as meet performance standards, improvement needed, or outstanding, whatever that may be. The important part is the desired effect is that there should be no surprises when you do the final evaluation. The employee should by then understand within reason what he or she can expect. That saves you a lot of grief, folks, believe me. Questions? Any comments? Okay, and then please remember that last phrase, no surprises at final evaluation. This is why managers run into problems because although they may put in a performance plan in place, then put everything in place, but then they don't do the reviews. They're not candid. They don't tell the employees really how they should be performance. That runs them into a lot of problems. So keep that in mind. Step 6 is the final evaluation.
Richard,
This, yes.
excuse me, I have a question from one of the class members. How do you implement this way of management without making the employees feel like you're watching their every move? It seems
like-
like it could make for a possible unpleasant workplace.
Well, again, we go back to the micromanagement aspect. Okay. You want to let the employees know how you're going to evaluate them, what points you're looking at. There's nothing wrong with tell the employees, this is what I look at, this is how I will evaluate you. These are the requirements, and those are outlined in the performance plan. When you go through the performance plan, you outline those requirements, you tell them, these are the things that I will be looking for. And most of those are control points that you'll put in there. so that the employee knows without a doubt what you're looking at. So that's how you avoid that type of situation. Does that answer your question?
Anne, or would anybody like to chime in? Bailey, what are your thoughts?
Anybody?
Yeah,
Bailey?
I think my thoughts,
I want to make sure I'm not confusing anybody here, so please feel free. Somebody had a comment?
yeah, Anne said that did answer her question.
Okay,
Yeah, I just think like the more relationships that you have, like good trusting relationships that supervisors have with the people whom they supervise, like the easier all this stuff becomes. If you have a level of trust with an employee, they're gonna probably feel that you trust the work that they're doing, and then you're able to work together on all this stuff. If that trust gets broken and that relationship is broken, even if you're doing the best of all this performance management, it's there's often going to feel like that the employee is being watched, or that you're critical of the employee. So to add in, like, I think that trust in those relationships are just like vital, especially when it comes to employee management.
Right, and that translates into what? Good communications, right?
Yeah.
If you recall, the employee relations aspect, that's one of the major aspects, is that communication cycle. It says that you want to make an employee comfortable by being upfront with the employee, being truthful in what you tell them. Be upfront with them. And once you get to that situation where they have a drop in performance and you have to do a reprimand, they will probably respect your opinion on that, because you've established that employee relations environment that says the employee, I'm credible as far as the employee is concerned, and I'm setting the stage. So that's what Bailey is saying is 100% correct. That depends on the relationship that you've established with that employee. I mentioned earlier about a priest that I dealt with this morning. One of the things that he's very, and does it somewhat unconsciously, is if one of his employees makes an error, his body language projects his dissatisfaction right away. He may not yell at the employee, but he shakes his head, letting the employee know, and trust me, body language says a lot. So that's again, but he has not sat with the employee to point out the situations. He's not established a working relationship with that employee. But that, again, communication cycle is so important to avoid those situations. Any other questions, comments?
Richard, I'd like to ask Bailey, give me some ways that I build trust.
I think there's a lot of ways to do it. I think two of the easiest ways is just kind of normal personal communication with somebody, like forming that, not over personal, not oversharing, but forming that friendly coworker relationship, where you're stopping by to check in and say, hi, how was your weekend? Kind of those small things, I think, go really far, with somebody knowing that they're cared about in the workplace. I mean, it has to be, I think, authentic as well. And really just taking, even if it's just a couple minutes a week, to just say hi and listen or check in on something is going on in their life. Beyond that, I think, like, building, especially as a supervisor, kind of building that ability to let somebody take a risk, or if they do make mistakes, having that conversation to let them know that it's okay to make that mistake. Like, let's move forward, so that they know that they're trusted, and they know they can be honest about kind of what's going on. I think those are two ways. And just, yeah, with that communication, just like having regular check-ins on the work that's being done so that things don't get to a point where as a supervisor or manager, you don't know, if there are problems until the very end when it's too hard to fix them. So if you're regularly communicating well, just say, how's that project going? Or how's this going? Or whatever it is that you're working on. Like checking in like a helpful way, or is there anything I can do to help you with this, or are you stuck, or do you have any questions? Those types of things.
Thank you. That's helpful. Thank you, Bailey.
A healthy environment is where the manager established a good relationship with the employee to the point where if the employee knows that he or she made an error of significance, they'll come to the managers, hey, listen, I need to tell you, this is what I did. I know I'm wrong, I made an error. That's good communication. That shows a level of trust because he or she knows that the manager is not going to make a mountain out of a molehill if it's a simple error or if it's a significant error, that he's not going to immediately terminate the employee. The comment coming is okay, so I thank you for letting me know. Let's move on, as Bailey just mentioned. Let's correct that error and let's move on. What can we do to prevent that in the future? So again, that communication cycle is extremely important. Any other comments? Okay, step number 6. Now we're getting into the final evaluation of the performance management cycle, the evaluation cycle. The final evaluation is a summary of the employee's performance. Let's take it step at a time. You start the performance plan on day 1. You're going to go through this cycle. Midway through the year, you've done your interim review or you've done interim reviews. Okay. So now you've got the summary of the employee's performance for that period of time. Now, planning is essential on the part of the manager. Manager identifies the performance against the plan, and it determines the strong and weak areas of performance, considers the prior interim review results, and each key area of performance is reviewed by manager in detail. This is something that you as a manager are now doing privately. Positive knowledge and skills, work quality, productivity, and so forth. So that planning in doing the evaluation, you want to plan where you're going to tell the employee, how you're going to rate the employee, what you're going to do in this summary of employees' performance. So this is extremely important so that you don't provide false information to the employee. You want to be fair. The manager uses the performance appraisal form, and I gave you a copy of that in your exhibits. You can be as detailed or as brief as decided. This particular form, for example, is online. It can be expanded. Different dioceses or different locations have a different form. Sometimes they're a check mark. It depends on what you want to do. This particular one I worked up so that's expandable online. You can just type it in the computer and write as much as you can or as little as you want. It applies to the performance evaluation tool. It rates employees in key areas. So the performance appraisal form, again, performs to the evaluation, the performance plan, and you want to rate the employee in each key area. The manager prepares for the final evaluation, and that means meeting one-on-one with the employee. This is again going back to an exclusive meeting with the employee. This is extremely important. You provide a copy of the appraisal to the employee during that session. You commend the employee on areas of strong performance. Then you also review the areas of deficiency, assuming there are some. This is critical. You want to make sure you don't leave anything out. You want to make sure that you do not be flowery again in your comments. The manager needs to ensure that the employee understands the reason for the ratings. Again, this goes back to that trust. You want to make sure the employee understands if you're rating the employee that feels comfortable that you did a fair job in doing that. Manager should consider the total net contribution. That means considerations of this, meeting performance objectives, continuing responsibilities such as punctuality, attendance, attitude, significant accomplishments if there were any. For example, any actions above beyond the requirements of the job. Those are all considerations in when you call total net contribution. You don't hold on one particular negative or one particular positive. Then the last step is to determine the performance level or the rating. And in the documents that I sent you the key that gives you the performance level, and this is what you look at. Okay. No, again, step 6, continuing, the verbiage must be consistent with the rating. You want to praise where praise is merited. If employee is not doing the job, the manager should be candid with the employee. Now I'm talking about the dialogue part. This is you're talking reviewing the performance evaluation of the employee. If employment is needed, the manager needs to provide detail of the employments needed. You do not just say you need to improve in this area, but you want to be as concise as you can as to what you observed that the employee is not doing correctly. The evaluation must be consistent with the plan objectives. In other words, you do not want to evaluate an employee on expectations that have not been identified in the plan. If you do, you're off base. You want to make sure that everything that you evaluate is based on that performance plan that you put together for that employee. After the evaluation is presented, the employee is then asked to sign only to acknowledge receipt. It's not an indication of the agreement or the rating. This is extremely important because you want to make sure the employee accepts the fact that you presented it, whether he agrees with the evaluation or not. Now, going back to the verbiage, to expand a little bit on that, you want to first of all praise for the employee's merit. So if the employee did well in one area, you want to say, John or Josephine, this is what you did very well in this area. I really commend you for it, and the result of your good work shows in the fact that we've reached that objective in that particular area. Now, the employee is not doing the job, you need to be candid with the employee. You need to make sure that you write down that the employee fell down in that area drastically, or that the employee really needs improvement in that particular area, and that the employee needs to do the following to be able to reach the targets that were identified. If improvement needed, the manager needs to provide the detail of those improvements. So this again is very to be consistent with the verbiage that you tell the employee. The last thing, as I mentioned earlier, I've seen many evaluations where an employee clearly is failing, yet the manager, well, John does a very good job and so forth, but he didn't do that well in that area. I'm sure he can improve. Well, that's not being candid with the employee. Sometimes managers will, or employees will recover, sometimes they will not. But being flowery in those verbiages that you put together does not help. Any questions on that? Any confusion on that? Comments? Okay. Again, performance cycle, set expectations,
Oh, okay.
review the progress, and the final step is evaluation of performance. And that's the effective feedback in the final evaluation. Step 7, now here we get into the management review. Now there are situations where employee will disagree with the appraisal. Now, when that happens, manager should reflect and review the entire appraisal. Okay. Again, we don't all have corner on smart folks. We all make mistakes, including we as managers. So if the employee disagrees with the appraisal, my advice has always been tell the employee, okay, let me review that part again. I'll take a good look at it and I'll get back to you. If the employee still disagrees, the employee can appeal to the next level manager or pastor for review. And the first step, if you review it and you find you made an error, there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, Mr. Employee, I made a mistake, so I'm going to change that. I'm going to delete that part or change the evaluation or the rating that I put on there. Nothing wrong with that. If anything, that gains you some respect as being fair. Now, there are situations where you may have reviewed it and you feel that you were fair, you did correct, fine, then stick to your guns and continue. If the employee still disagrees, then the employee can appeal to the next level of manager or the pastor for review. No, the reviewing manager or the pastor should uphold or reject the appraisal. The responsibility that person has is now to review what you did and that tell you, yes, you're correct, or no, you're not. You need to go back and change that. Again, there's nothing wrong with that. That can happen on occasion. If the next level manager or the pastor feels the evaluation was fair, the employee should be so advised. If not, he asks the manager to re-review or reverse the rating. Now, this is the importance of the next level of manager. This may be difficult in a small operation. For example, if you got the pastor and 2 or 3 employees. So then what's the next avenue? What's your next level of manager? That probably would be human resources or the bishop himself. That depends on the organization. If the employee is still not agreeing, appeal process is a final step. In an organization, there should be some kind of an appeal process that talks about what the next step is if the employee disagrees. As a last resort, again, contact St. Cloud Human Resources for assistance. Bailey, am I correct?
Yeah, we're always here to help walk you through those processes. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, this is the value of human resources director or person in the human resources organization that can think logically through that. Sometimes a pastor will ask you to review that if he or she or if he doesn't feel comfortable with that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the important part is that the employee should have an avenue of appeal of some kind. If he exhausts those appeals, then I'm sorry, but then you have to do what you have to. Questions on that? Okay, in summary, satisfactory employee performance is essential for a well-functioning organization. I think that's clear. Expectations and the results must be clearly communicated and documented. Again, employees appreciate knowing where they stand. One of the worst things that I've heard in many situations in going to a parish or an organization is an employee tell you, well, I've been here 2 years and I really don't know where I stand. My manager has not talked to me. That should not exist. Employees appreciate knowing where they stand. Personally, I've always been of the opinion, and the employee himself has some responsibility as well, asking the manager to tell them where they stand. Okay, no, there's nothing wrong with that as well. Timeliness again and consistency of their views is essential. Knowledge of contribution instills pride in employees and working for the church. If they know whether they're contributing or not is very important to any employee. We all want to know, including myself or yourself, that we're doing something that's worthwhile for the church. If we know that we're contributing, as far as I'm concerned, I think it makes us all feel good. If we're not, then we don't feel that great. Your familiarity with performance management can be of significant value to your pastor and to the Diocese of St. Cloud. So folks, this is a summary of the performance management cycle that I've covered today. Any questions on anything that I've covered? Anybody?
Richard,
Anybody confused? Yes.
Richard, I was surprised. I don't know whether other people were as well, that when the employee signs this performance review, it's not that he or she agrees with the evaluation, but it's just a signature that says, yes, this happened.
Yes. The reason for that is once that employee has signed that, that's an acknowledgement that the manager did review the employee's performance. Now, if that employee decides to file a discrimination charge or go to the Attorney General's office, for example, a complaint of unlawful discharge or unfairness, the first question is that normally they would ask is, have you been evaluated by your employee,
Oh.
by your employer? And if the employee says no, then typically they'll send it back and says, well, listen, I need some document that tells me whether you've been doing your job or not. And if it's the employee acknowledges that, then that would be presented to whoever does any type of investigation at that level. But that's a reason for that. The employee may still disagree, but as long as they agree that we did present it to them, that's the important part. Questions? Anybody? No. That's the way I have those in there. Now, there may be a diocese or some other organization that feels that that signature is an acknowledgement that they agree with that performance plan. That's not always going to work. That calls for a lot of argument, a lot of ill feelings. And that's one way of avoiding that, although that's not the main reason. Okay. Any questions? Anything else? Is there anything in particular that we went through today that is problematic to you or I was not clear in? Anybody? Don't be shy. Tell me so I can get it straightened out. Okay, well, the next session that we're going to go into, now we're going to get into managing unsatisfactory or marginal employees. This is a follow-on to the performance management cycle. So right now you've gotten to the point where you evaluated an employee, you put all the steps in place. Now the employee's responsibility is to carry through with that performance plan and satisfy to you that they're doing the job. However, that doesn't always happen. There's always other things that occur where the employee is not doing their job. Then the question comes in, how do I attack that? How do I approach that? We'll review that at the next session, the final session, and that's equally important because we're going to talk about what you need to do from a discipline standpoint, what the situation is with employee terminations, so forth. So we're going into that cycle next week. Any other questions? Anything else? Okay, I don't have anything else unless somebody else has some questions. Bailey, anything?
A few people have asked for the slides, and Richard, can you send those to me and I'll get them out to everyone?
Yes, absolutely. I will get
Okay.
those to you. Sure, no
So
problem.
we'll get the slides out to everyone
Okay,
as a follow-up.
okay.
And also as a follow-up, Bailey, Ann Garrido, the famous author on conflict management, administration and conflict, she has created a sheet of tips to use for difficult conversations. And as Richard was going through these performance steps, I was thinking that those tips, those samples of questions might be very helpful. So Bailey, I'll send them to you and send them out, please.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of information out there, folks. Again, if you're subscribed to the NACPA conversation boards that we have, there's a lot of information there. If you belong to SHRM, side of Human Resources, a lot of information there. As I mentioned, this session that I took you through a session that in most corporations they spend a week on. So there's a lot of things in between that may be missing. Unfortunately, we don't have the luxury of a whole week to spend on it, but I want to give you a flavor. Hopefully that'll encourage you to do some more studying because as managers, if you're going to manage people, it's extremely important. And as I mentioned in my career, I've always been an advocate of performance management, and it's bailed me out of a lot of situations. Trust me, I have made mistakes the same as any manager, and this is what has really saved my skin more than once because I apply those principles and apply them as best I could. So do yourselves a favor, learn about the performance management cycle, what you need to do, and apply it. And that'll help you out a lot, aside from helping you establish a good relationship with your employees and implementing that trust that we talked about, because they will respect you if they know that you're doing a fair job and trying to do the best you can for them. Any other comments or questions? Okay, I don't have anything else. Regina, I'll take it over to you. And Bailey?
No, I'm good. And I've enjoyed being with the class. So you're engaged. You ask great questions, comments. So I've enjoyed it. Bailey?
By
Yeah,
the way,
we'll
if you have,
gather one more time next week, same time, same place. If you have any questions in the meantime, I know some of you are waiting for some recordings and I expect to get those shortly. So I will get those for those of you who've requested them. I'll get those out to you hopefully this week. I'll follow up with the slides and some other links and resources that we've talked about today. And we'll see you all next week.
And
Yeah.
Bailey, if they haven't seen the movie Conclave, people tell me it's a must-see.
Yeah, I've heard it's good. Our Jessica saw it.
I did. I saw it. It was great.
It's a must-see, I hear, right, Jessica?
It is.
okay, folks, well, listen, meanwhile, I'll get out of the session. But meanwhile, I've given you a lot of information. If there's any confusion, any hesitation, somebody to ask a question, please forward it to Bailey. Have her forward it to me. I'll be more than glad to get into dialogue with you to the extent of getting on the phone if necessary. Some of this can be a little bit confusing. It may seem a little convoluted, but there's a method to the madness. So I want to make sure everybody understands that. That's very, very important for me so that you understand. So feel free to ask the question. Okay. Thank you all. Appreciate your participation.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard.
Okay. Bye now.